Hello guys and happy Tuesday. So in today's video, someone actually asked me, could I do a video on just, I guess, debunking some of the money myths I tend to hear about, or maybe that you may see online, or even some questions that you guys have maybe asked me in the past. And I thought this would be quite a good idea just to really share my opinions and let you guys know what my thoughts are around those certain topics. Now, before I do get started, I should say that these are my own personal opinions. You really don't have to agree with it. And before I even forget, remember, I'm not even a financial advisor anyway. So again, this is based on my personal opinion. I am not telling you what to do with your money. So I've written a few points where I think these are money myths on my phone. And the first one I want to talk about is the fact that you should never ever get a credit card. So for me personally, I do agree with this to a small extent. And the reason why I agree with this slightly is just because there is a difference between getting a credit card and being in credit card debt. Now, if you are someone that is always in credit card debt and you really struggle to actually pay off your balance all the time, then I would agree that you should not be getting a credit card until you've got to the point where you're actually disciplined and financially educated to understand how credit cards work, meaning that you're probably never going to be in credit card debt again. So with that case, I would definitely say no to having a credit card, especially if you do think that you're potentially going to get into debt. But for me personally, I do actually use a credit card and I've actually really enjoyed using it so far. In the past, I actually used to be quite scared of using a credit card, so I never had one in uni, so I never had credit card debt. But then again, I still had an overdraft, so I was still in debt. So I think that's why it's always interesting when people say you should never use a credit card, particularly if you have been listening to Dave Ramsey, because he's one of those people where he absolutely hates credit cards and he says that no one should ever use them. But for me personally, I don't actually think I've increased my spending when it comes to using a credit card. I mean, I tend to have this system where I genuinely just use it either for big purchases or just my general spending. So maybe I'm going grocery shopping, I will use my credit card then. I know that there are some studies that say, you know, you're more likely to spend more with your credit card, but at the end of the day, nowadays, most people will use contactless payments. So you'll either pay through your phone or you'll pay through your card. So for me, I don't really necessarily see it as a difference. Again, when it comes to my mindset, that credit card is not free money. Like, I would have to pay it. And so every single time I actually spend money on my credit card, I pay it off as soon as possible. I don't even wait until the end of the month to pay it off. So for me, that's why I do think, you know, actually using a credit card can be really useful if you know how to use it. If you don't know how to use it, then personally, I don't think you should be using a credit card. But again, that is just my personal opinion. So the next money myth I want to talk about is investing is only for rich people. Now, I definitely do not agree with this, and I think it is a complete myth, mainly because I am not rich and I'm still investing. Now, obviously, if you're thinking about history and back in the day, then yes, it would have been a lot more difficult for you to start investing. But now that we've got so much technology, it is so easy to start investing, and you can actually even start with as little as £1 from some of the platforms that you might be using. Now, when it comes to investing, I don't think that you should just be blindly investing your money and then just thinking that that's it. I do think that there's some research that you should be doing, and you should maybe also be thinking about setting your financial foundation first. So whether it comes to things like actually having savings and an emergency fund and all of those things. But I do personally think that investing is important, and I do keep trying to stress that, again, saving is only going to take you so far. So if you do think that investing is only for certain types of people, believe you and me when I say it is not. It is for everyone, and really the earlier that you start as well, the better. So it's something where I would definitely encourage you, if you haven't started already. Again, there's a lot of content, whether it's on YouTube, on videos, you can even get courses. Now, if you are a total beginner and you've been thinking about investing in the stock market, for example, but you just don't really know where to start, or all the information just really feels very overwhelming, I will actually leave a link in the description below. So there is actually a course made by The Humble Penny, and it's called Super Simple Investing. So if you do really want to get started investing in the stock market and you really just want clear steps to get started, I would definitely recommend that course. If you've not watched The Humble Penny, they also have a YouTube channel, and they just have so much information as well when it comes to financial independence and personal finance. So definitely check that link in the description below. Apart from that, I also do have a video that really talks about investing as a beginner in the stock market. So definitely check that video out if you haven't already. I will of course link that up here for you and in the description below. So the next money myth I want to talk about is the fact that you should buy a home at all costs. Now, this is always an interesting one, particularly when people are talking about this rent versus buy scenario. And for me, I do actually have personal opinions on this. Now, again, I will never say that people should not buy a home or that they should always rent for the rest of their lives. But what I do think is that you should be buying a home that you can afford. And I will keep preaching this, because I do feel like I see that there is this pressure that you should be buying your house as soon as possible. But guys, if you cannot afford that house, I do not think you should be buying it. Personally, that is my opinion. The reason being is because you do not want that house to become a curse. You want to be able to enjoy your house. And for me, the big mistake I see is people trying to put all of their money into their house and then realizing that their mortgage is so high that they can't afford to be able to invest. They can't afford to actually have an emergency fund. And if something does happen, let's say the boiler breaks down or the roof collapses, they don't actually have money to fix it and end up having to go into debt to pay for it. So that's why I'm always quite cautious when people are like, yeah, you should always be buying a house, because I do think there are going to be some circumstances where buying a house probably isn't the best thing to do. And I think the other worry I have is because you're really pushed to actually buy your house as soon as possible, everyone sort of sees your house as your main investment, and then that's it. And what I tend to see is that people then don't actually invest in other asset classes. Now, for me personally, I don't think your house is an investment per se. Like, technically speaking, it is an asset, but for me, I don't see my house as an investment. I see my house as a place to live, to be able to maybe start a family, to make memories, to be able to do whatever I want to in that house. But what I see is some people actually forget about investing in any types of assets. And again, I'm not talking about things like buy to let property, so actually buying a house to rent out. Definitely not talking about that. That is a way to actually invest, and it's something that I definitely have an interest in. But when it comes to your own primary residential house, I think people forget that unless you are renting out a room or maybe you started a business in your house, you're probably not going to be making money on that house. Now, I know a lot of people will argue that, you know, maybe over certain periods of time, maybe after 10 years, that you would have made money on your house because your house would have increased in value. And yes, that could potentially be true, providing the housing market has actually gone up. But what you also need to think about is if you actually sell your house, and obviously if you make money, where are you going to live? You're probably going to buy another house, and most likely that house that you're going to buy has also increased in value. So I think when people are saying, you know, you can really make a lot of money when it comes to actually buying your own house, potentially, yes, if you're thinking about renting a property out, that's a whole different story. But when it comes to your own primary residential house, unless you're planning to downsize, or maybe you're planning to actually rent your own house when you move out, you may not end up making as much money as you thought you would have, because by the time you think about moving somewhere else, that new house that you might be moving to probably has increased in value as well. So I do think people should really take that into consideration and just not solely focus on just having a house. I do think people should be thinking about other investments as well, and not just relying on your house as your total net worth. But again, at the same time, buying a house can be very, very useful, particularly if you are staying there for the long term, and especially if you're able to pay off your mortgage as well, because it does mean you'll have less expenses over time. But again, what you really want to be thinking about are things like location. You want to be thinking about flexibility, how long you're actually going to be in the house, because if you're only going to stay in the house for a couple of years, you might find that it might be better to actually start renting. Now, I definitely explained that more in a video where I talk about rent versus buy, so definitely check that out if you haven't already. I will of course link that up here for you and in the description below. And of course, I know some people may argue that you can always rent your house if you decide to move out or you decide to sell it. But again, with those two things, I think the first thing with renting your house, you need to make sure that the numbers are going to stack up, particularly when you do have costs involved. So you'll need to be thinking about things like, are you going to be using a lettings agent, because that's going to take money from your profit? Will you actually be making a profit at the end of the day when you take into consideration all those costs? So there's obviously a lot to think about. And even when it comes to selling your house, if you're trying to sell it in a couple of years, you basically need to hope that the housing market has indeed gone up and your house value has actually gone up for you to be able to make that money back, because otherwise you might find that you may have potentially lost money just because you've put all that money into the house at first, and maybe your house hasn't increased in value as much as you would like. So definitely make sure you're taking those things into consideration. I feel like I've talked about that long enough, but again, I'm just very passionate about making sure that yes, I do believe buying a house is great, but I want you to buy a house that you can afford at the end of the day. So the next money myth I want to talk about is this saying where people claim that I'm young, there is no need to think about retirement yet. Now guys, this is where I always ask the question, do you really want to be depending on the government when you retire? Do you really? Because I definitely don't. And for me, I just feel like the younger you start, the easier it can become when it does come to retirement. Now for me personally, I've actually seen people struggling when it comes to retirement because they realize they don't have enough savings for retirement, and I definitely do not want to be in that situation. And sometimes you may even start seeing people having to downsize their home, and the reason being is not because they actually want to and they maybe want less space, it's because they don't have a choice and that they have to in order to be able to survive with their money. Now for me, I'm not saying that I want to be having hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars every single month for me to enjoy my retirement. I'm definitely not saying that, but for me personally, I want to feel like I'm financially secure, and I don't really want to have to worry about paying other bills because I haven't actually saved up enough for retirement. So for me, I do think, particularly if you are a millennial or Gen Z, you have the opportunity to really start focusing on retirement now so that you don't have to work as hard in the future. Now, you might not have a lot of money to start investing, but to be honest, I do think even if you have a small amount of money, whether it's, you know, £50 or $50, that you can really just start investing and putting that money to work every single month. I mean, you'll be surprised at how that can actually start to compound over time. Now, when I'm talking about compound interest, and if you have no idea what that means, definitely check out my video where I talk about how you can actually become a millionaire, because it will allow you to understand that in a bit more detail. So if you haven't watched that, I will link that up here for you and in the description below. Now, personally for me, I don't necessarily think I'll be retiring at the age of 65. I do think I will probably retire earlier, but even when it comes to retiring, I do still want to be able to do things that I love to do in the form of work, but whether that's maybe my own business or anything like that. So everyone sort of has their own sort of definition of retirement, but I do think when it comes to a point where you think about living your life when you're probably not working, you do want to have assets that are actually paying for your lifestyle so that you can actually afford to retire and still be able to enjoy your life. So I actually think I'm going to leave that there. I did have a few more money myths that I wanted to talk about, but I feel like I've been talking for ages today, so I'm going to leave it there. And if you guys do want me to maybe do a part 2 video on this, definitely let me know in the comments below. Again, I think it'll be really interesting to sort of hear your views and whether you agree with me or not, so definitely let me know as well. But apart from that, if you did like this video, then please do give me a thumbs up if you haven't already, and let me know in the comments whether you agree or disagree with any of those statements. I do usually post every Tuesday and Friday, but again, I'm just taking a small break over the summer just to recuperate. But again, I will see you guys on Tuesday.